Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation, the podcast that explores the reality of a word that is in danger of losing its meaning altogether. This podcast is produced by Outlast Consulting, LLC, a boutique consultancy that helps companies use innovation principles to solve their toughest business problems. I'm your host, Jared Simmons, and I'm so excited to have Jeff Wiguna. Jeff was in 7th grade when he embarked on his first camping trip with his Scout Troop 1005. He remembers that one of his tent poles broke and he fixed it in the dark with packing tape, a daunting task for a 7th grader. His outdoor memories include late nights of Capture the Flag and playing other games around a campfire. All of these experiences sparked his strong belief that being outside brings joy and led him to found Kuju Coffee with his brother Justin in 2015. He knew Justin's combination of technical and creative abilities would be a great complement to his own wild mind of ideas. You should have seen what we built with Legos when we were kids. Prior to brewing up Kuju, Jeff was sales and marketing director at Good Paper, a fair trade consumer goods company where he led a turnaround from declining sales to national distribution at Whole Foods Market. Jeff is passionate about building brands that have a scaled and relevant impact on the world. He is a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley's Haas School of Business. He's also an avid jazz pianist on the side and is surrounded by inspiring, strong women at home, his wife, 2 young daughters, and their dog. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the show, my friend.
My pleasure, Jared. Absolutely my pleasure.
So I'd like to start off in the same place with everyone. Tell me, what is innovation?
I imagine everyone has such a different answer to it, and I'm not going to act like I have this thing in my head that I know, but as we've discussed, I'm a musician, so I actually think through a lot of business principles through the frameworks of jazz music, just because I know it so well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, innovation is actually maybe the business term for the emotion of bravery. And it takes a lot of bravery to just try things that haven't been done.
Right.
And to be brave, to go forth with something when everyone around you does not think it's a good idea.
Right.
And that's even, going to music, it's just the coolest things are the solos that you've never heard before. But if you're that person, you never know if people will like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at the heart of it, if you can just say, I don't care, I'm just going to go there.
Right.
With confidence, then it becomes innovation.
Right.
So it's almost like when you do anything that no one has done before, without confidence is not innovation. It's just kind of a side hustle or something. But when you add confidence into it, for some reason, I think it becomes innovation because there's a spirit of making a statement behind that thing. And I don't feel like people know it when the statement is being made, but that's why music is interesting, because they can feel it. You can definitely feel it.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I think we've danced around innovation, because existentially speaking, it inherently is a moving target.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the target is? It's a moving target. Do you think people consciously have a target?
I think innovation, one, is a target in itself that is maybe not necessary for everybody. So sometimes people just want to hear, at last,
right,
the jazz standard, right?
Right.
And they don't want you to go off and add a bridge and all that stuff.
That's
and
right.
the innovation is just singing it the way they've always done it, but in your way.
Right.
In terms of business, like being a follower brand and just trying to do something somebody else does, but being the low cost option, I guess is innovative, but in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is a moving target for everybody. But I think the way you kind of approach it is you have to not think in terms of innovation, but really have a lot of clarity on what are you trying to achieve. And in music, it's what are you trying to say.
Right.
In business, it's what's your underlying business strategy behind something, because you could have a tactical product innovation that is superb, but it could take the whole over 5-year strategy down. And there's a lot of things that can happen there. And I think it's difficult. I think it's really important to not think in terms of innovation and therefore just get a sense of what do we want to achieve. And then I actually feel like the innovation becomes very easy because it just shows itself. And it should be natural.
Right. Right. It makes me think about and I'm a jazz novice. I'm a guy on the sidelines kind of messing around. You're trained and you know the stuff. Uh but it makes me think about when people talk about overplaying,
Yeah.
you know? I think a lot of the most innovative things that we see and talk about and use on a day-to-day basis, someone didn't sit down and say, I want to be innovative,
Yeah.
you know.
It's a good
So
point.
what am I going to create? They were solving a problem. And I think a lot of times when you sit and listen to a jazz musician, you can tell the difference between someone who's sitting down to say, I want to make a statement versus sitting down and say, I want to show you how great I am at playing jazz piano.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's, and completely agree. But I think what is striking is I've heard those performances and I've watched those YouTube videos. And when someone's trying to impress, you don't you don't feel anything. You just hear what they're playing.
Mm,
And there's nothing special about that
hmm.
because you're just listening to technique. And I think that's where, when I said on the last question, if you insert something crazy but add bravery to it, then you're making a statement, and then you're adding kind of a sense of humanity into it.
Yeah.
Every medium, whether it's business or music or any kind of art, is to me is nothing other than just kind of a material construct in which we can use the human perspective and human creative energy to build something. So, quite frankly, if it's really destructive as a product, like if it includes slavery in the supply chain, that's not because the supply chain is bad. It's because the people doing it uh, have that in their heart. They just don't care.
Hmm.
Um, and then where it gets really bad is when the creators did that, but then they, for large brands, they die because time passes, and then there's the next private equity company that comes along and manages it. For them, they're managing it, they're not so much creating it. And that's when you get these cyclical kind of organizations that just do what they do, and they don't seem like they care. And I think as a startup brand, um, that's the opposite of what people usually say when they say, I love your brand, it's really cool to me, versus, oh, that company's really heartless. Because how can a company be heartless if it's not truly organic?
Hmm.
But so it implies that every company has a heart or not. And
Right.
I think when it comes to like music, overplaying doesn't use the heart, it uses the head, because
Hmm.
you're thinking, I want to impress people. You're not sharing what's inside. And I love that comment, because I've watched this video on YouTube multiple times with Bill Evans. He said, the thing that a lot of jazz musicians do is they overplay because they think they need to impress. But and we all kind of understand that, right?
Hmm.
But he said, why not par it down and do something? And he, and paraphrasing, but he kind of went in this direction. He said, do something that is true, intentional, and the third thing was something that you can build on.
Mm.
And that was cool,
Oh, yeah.
because I mean, what is that? It's one, it's true, and you're like, yeah, okay, that's great. Intentional, yeah, that's great. But the most important thing is that you can build on it. Because if you're overplaying, he said, where else are you going to go?
Right.
And the magic of anything, in my
Mm.
opinion, that is created is not that it exists in a timeline. People always say to us, if they're fans, they say, oh, I've been following you, or I love where you started. They're not saying I love you today. They're saying I love that journey or that story or that narrative.
Right.
And that's why companies can make billions of dollars off movies, because people can't help but get involved with the story. And so if you don't have the heart, people are not going to be able to hear the story
Mm.
inside your playing. And it's the same thing for business. So overplaying is so hard because it's the human temptation to want to impress.
Right. Right.
And I used to try to make an impression all the time, uh, because I thought that's how you get people to buy your stuff.
Hmm.
Over time, I've learned that it's better and more important to make a connection over making an impression,
Wow.
because the connection is something that you can build on. The impression, by definition, is a stamp in time,
Right.
and it takes a lot of work to upkeep that. But if you build a relationship and a connection, people recognize that their impression, by virtue of being connected, evolves. And I think there's something very special about that. And that's kind of what jazz improv is all about, right? It's the
Yeah.
connection between the players and the audience. And no one cares if you're playing well. They just want to see what are you going to do,
Yeah.
and then what is the rest of the band going to do. That's what's cool. It's not so much what are you going to play, and
Right.
it's like, oh, are we going to play for 10 minutes longer or not? Is he that's the drama. It's not what is he playing.
Right. Right.
And that's why it's so cool. It's and you can, I think if you go to like jazz festivals, you where you can see everyone who's watching,
Hmm.
you can visually see their anticipation, like leaning in when the musician really gets into it, because they're all thinking, oh, where's he going to go next? Where's he going to go next?
Right.
And I also think from a marketing standpoint, that's what you got to do with your customers. What are they going to do next? What's he going to do next? That's why it can get fun.
Yeah, no, that is brilliant. That's the connection versus impression thing is, I mean, that's solid gold, man. I mean, and it's words that a jazz musician needs to hear. It's words that any
Hmm.
business person needs to hear because of just the way you articulated it, the difference between something you can build on versus,
Yeah.
a moment in time. I think the other piece of kind of what you unpacked there for me is in my mind is when you think about human nature, you mentioned, overplaying is kind of a way of people trying to kind of impress, and it's human nature to
Yeah.
try to show what you've been working on. I mean, people don't
Yeah.
understand musicians talk about woodshedding, and
Yeah.
people don't know what all is encompassed in that small word. I mean,
Yeah.
hours and hours. Bill Evans used to talk about. He said, you can't master a piece without putting. You have to put 24 hours into a piece to really own it. And a 3-minute song played for 24 hours. That's a that's a
Yeah.
that's a lot of playing. So I think that translates to business as well, where we try to sometimes lead with the hard part or talk about the hard part instead of the part that people care about. And I,
Yeah.
I think you do a great job as a brand of not talking so much about how you provide the experience, but what that experience means.
Yeah, no, I'm still thinking about that 24-hour thing. That's a lot. Um, Mostly because jazz forms are usually also kind of short, so it's
Yeah,
like
that's what
it's
I'm
like
saying.
even
Yeah,
faster.
yeah, yeah.
So I don't think too much about how we do that on the brand, because well, instead what we think about is, are we connecting with what we really wanted to try to do in the beginning?
Hmm.
And a good example of that is the ongoing temptation to try to do whole beans on an evergreen basis,
Hmm.
um, or sell to anything that is not necessarily outdoor related, because the head thought is, well, let's get bigger, let's do that. But for some reason, and I feel like seems unrelated, but I think it is, by staying focused on just the core message of our brand and our product, is probably the equivalent to saying, hey, we're not here to impress. We're not here to say we're now
Hmm.
doing RTDs or ready to drink beverages.
Right.
We're now doing whole beans, and now we're doing K cups. That's flashy and good for press, and maybe if you're private equity backed, required.
Right.
But I think what we've done in terms of being focused is equivalent to starting with something that is true, intentional, and something that you can build on. And that even translates into things like a cap table. Like if
Right.
you start with your cap table, very simple, it's clean. You don't go for institutional funding right away. Um, your intentions will be more true. And by definition of having a cleaner cap table for longer at the beginning of a company, you can build it longer.
Right.
The comparison is probably if you start out with the VCs or something, it still can be true and intentional and something to build on, but what it means to build actually is so different than if it was just one singular person who's out there maybe trying to start a business.
Hmm.
It kind of goes back to just, are you inserting bravery? For some people, it takes bravery to say, hey, I'm going to go build a brand this way or take funding. Others, it takes bravery to say, I want to do that, but I actually feel more convicted that this is kind of the route that I need to take. And I don't think one is better than the other, but I think it's important to know where you stand and do the thing that requires bravery.
Right. Right. Because the thing that requires bravery seems to me to be a signal for, I would do this if it weren't so hard. So
Yeah,
it requires bravery. But the fact that it's hard or scary is not a reason to not do it.
correct. And I think bravery as a word has a connotation of something positive at the end, right?
Sure.
Otherwise, you would use a word like idiocy or something, right? And you
Yeah.
just do crazy, stupid stuff all the time.
Exactly.
But you got to be brave for the better and the good things.
Mhm.
And I think if you do that, it's just kind of like if you're going on a hike, and you say, I don't want to do that hike because it looks too hard. Let me be brave, though. You don't know what you're going to find if you go on that hike, and that's where innovation comes in. You'll find things that you didn't even know existed,
Right.
and by being the brave one to go there, you're just not. You're going to feel like all you're doing is just being yourself and being brave. But from the outsiders who didn't go there, they're going to see that as innovation.
Right.
So innovation almost feels normal for the people inside, or it just feels scary, but to the outside it looks innovative.
Right.
And it's important to, I think, to understand the dichotomy, because you're not going to feel innovative when you're innovating. You might just be more tired than everybody else, or more scared.
Yeah.
That's what it's like for me, at least.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, tired and terror.
Yeah,
Those are
yeah,
your
and
bedfellows in the
and yeah,
world of entrepreneurship.
I can even share when we went to a trade show for this pour over product. There's so many people I spoke with. Even one of the co-founders of Zico Coconut Water.
Mhm.
I didn't know who she was until like midway into the conversation, and I said, "Hey, we want to sell this coffee thing to camping." And they all said like, "Oh, the market's too small. Market's too small." Like they all said that. Like
Mhm.
people from Smuckers who were coming by. But now look at the market. Like
Right.
outdoor is like the next cool thing, and
Right.
so I don't know. I guess you could say I was definitely brave or gutsy, but the point is like I went down that path, not trying to be innovative, but doing it because I thought this is cool, this is interesting. We gotta try it.
Right.
And by virtue of being brave enough to go down that path, I think we're seen as innovative not because we were innovative, but because the context around us gave us that angle.
Right.
Kind of like winners write history, that type of thing.
Right. I think it's also kind of like, a jazz trio. Your piano solo sounds a little better because the bass player
Yeah,
took a different route on his bass line and
yeah,
inserted some tritones or did whatever
yeah,
to really make your solo stand out.
yeah,
And because you're being true, you're making a statement, you're being brave, you're making a connection. When the world around you starts to shift, you don't have to react and respond the way everybody else does because you're on a true and natural path for you, and
yeah,
things tend to more fall into place, I think.
yeah, yeah. No, the trio thing, I actually think that's probably like the best. Like that's the best. I mean, in jazz, you at least have that connection with your bandmates, and they can maybe see it.
Mhm.
Obviously, in the marketplace, maybe you don't have a connection, but maybe the next thing to bandmates would actually just be your customers.
Mhm.
You got to listen to your bandmates, you got to listen to your customers, and they feed off of each other. And if you do it, then everybody wins.
Everybody wins.
Yeah,
That's why I love music. I love music as a business analogy over sports or war because in music, everybody wins.
yeah. That's cool. Plus the people who are not playing.
Right.
That's kind of the most important thing. It's something that you can truly share. Versus, I guess, if you win a baseball World Series, I guess you can kind of share it, but you don't feel it in the same way. People can feel similarly in music.
Yeah, and I think there's an unspoken, completely kind of human element of music where, you bring someone from, I don't know, from another country and sit them down to watch a 9 inning baseball game. It
Mhm.
could be the seventh game of the World Series and it may be of little or no interest.
Yeah,
But if you put on, Giant Steps or A Love Supreme,
yeah,
they may not know what they're listening to, but it's going to get their attention.
yeah.
What
Oh
is this?
man. Yeah, what I watched this John Coltrane documentary, and it said that he lived like upstairs in his 2-floor home, like all the time, and he just wrote it, and
Yeah.
his family's like, "What the heck is he
Yeah.
doing?" And he comes down, and you know what I'm talking about, and then he
Yes.
does his work. I figured it out,
Yeah.
you know,
He
and so
just
it's
came
just like,
downstairs with
yeah,
the greatest, one of the greatest jazz albums of all time. Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's just like that, I don't know. That must be related to innovation somehow, because maybe he just had to, disconnect himself from the world so that he. I mean, again, the bravery thing. Like maybe because the world, I think, distracts us from innovation. Inertia
Hmm.
is so powerful.
Right. No, yeah. No, people forget that innovation is a form of change.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and humans are not really change enthusiasts by and large,
yeah.
and so there is a level of natural resistance to innovative things, things we look back on that we would, you never question their role in society. People were ostracized for,
Yeah.
when they introduced them.
Well, on the giant steps thing, I think you probably heard this too. Is I heard the story that when John Coltrane brought the chart to like a session player or something,
Hmm.
they thought he was joking because it was just like 251, 251, 251 over
Yeah,
and over. So they thought it
yeah,
was like an exercise.
yeah.
And like, no, man, this is the song. And I think I mean, it's just important to recognize that that standard was first received like that, but not anymore.
Right.
That's so interesting to me. Or another one, this is not related to music, but I remember I was listening to How I Built This, and they interviewed the guy who brought Power Rangers to the Western world.
Hmm.
And everyone thought it was like so dumb because he would buy Japanese footage, find American actors, and splice it together,
Right.
made up a new theme song. But he said at the end of it, like, if everyone thinks what I'm about to do is really stupid, then I know I'm onto something. And I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I was like, how is that possible? Now I get it because it's almost by definition, if people love it, then it is now.
Mm. Wow.
It is now.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a future element,
Yeah,
built into innovation, built into change, built into evolution of anything.
yeah, and I would also add, I think you have to treat innovation like a jazz solo. You got to give yourself the time. You got to
Hmm.
start off slow. You got to tell everyone where you're going. When you know everyone's there, then you can start playing,
Right.
and then everyone gets there. But at that point, the innovation is done, right? And then you wind down the solo. You go back to the form.
Right.
But I think that early stage of, okay, it's my turn to solo. I'm just going to play a couple notes on these first four bars. I actually find that that time is more important in serving your bandmates so they
Hmm.
can kind of orient with you, even though you might not feel like that's what you're trying to say.
Right.
You just got to give people that time, and I think that applies to marketing. You just can't say everything at the same time. You got to give them like the first four bars to get a taste of what you're doing.
Hmm.
And as a startup, once you start doing that, and then you get everyone, then you can do it. But the underlying emotion I find in that is one patience, but you have to recognize that your solo also needs to be a story in a
Right.
lot of ways.
Yes.
And then the business art, though, is like maybe you only have 32 bars to tell your story. So can you do it in 32 or 16 or 8?
Hmm.
Because anyone can do a solo with an infinite amount of bars, right?
Right. Exactly.
But that's not, that's like saying, well, you only have $100,000 for this marketing budget. You got to figure it out. So it's super cool. There's so many things
Yeah.
in that experience.
The thing you're pointing out there, in my mind, is the role of constraints in innovation. And I think a lot of times, when people hear the word innovation, they think, oh, boundless, blue sky, wild, crazy ideas, blah, blah, blah. But I think a lot of the truly game changing, forward moving things that required bravery, that have come through the business world, medicine, art, music, those things were created almost as in partnership with the constraints of a medium or a problem to be solved, and wouldn't look the way they look without those constraints.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it hasn't only actually been until the last year that I've really valued having constraints
Hmm.
because it's just too easy to spend money. It's
Yeah.
too easy. Let's just do ads.
Hmm.
The thing is, people don't put themselves in situations where they experience constraints.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's difficult to find innovation as a result. But I guess again, if you're brave enough to put yourself there and say, no, we don't need more money. Let me just sit here, figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can come up with something. The other thing I would say is I think innovation, pulls from applying something that applies to one sector and putting it to the other. So I was trying to think of cool marketing things, and I don't need to get into the specifics, but I was trying to think, well, coffee and outdoor stuff, should not think about coffee companies or outdoor companies. Let me think about the financial services sector.
Mm.
And what do they do that's
Yeah.
innovative that we can do for this coffee consumer goods? And we came up with something that was really cool.
Very nice.
But it's like if a piano player doesn't feel like they can copy a drummer or a guitar solo. But if you just think about it, if I try to do a solo and pretend I'm a guitar player, it's just going to come out differently.
Yep.
So I guess this feels very normal to me. I feel like you totally get it, but I think the principle is the bravery again, but also maybe just a level of humility to just do something that you don't feel comfortable with.
I think bravery and humility are great ways to kind of sum that thought up. I also, grew up in music and a little bit of music training, but I grew up mostly in choirs. And, if you're improvising or riffing or whatever, yeah, like Ella Fitzgerald, if you listen to her with orchestras, she's not just scatting, she's mimicking one of the instruments, you know, and it puts you in a different mindset because different people use different instruments different ways, and so you approach things differently, just like you were saying.
Yeah.
So I think there's that complementary aspect or view of the world musicians have. I think so. You never think about competing with the drummer or competing with the bass player or competing with the alto section or whatever. It's how can I build on what they're doing to make something bigger or different, or how can I learn something from them or take something from what they're doing to make what I'm doing better. And when you turn and look at the business world with that lens, I don't think people have a full appreciation for how different the business world looks if you look at it from that lens, that landscape.
Yeah. Oh man, that I think that's definitely so true. I think it's very obvious when you're thinking about your own partners.
Right.
But the reason I just kind of sighed, because it might be interesting to think about that from the standpoint of how you look at negotiations. Because oh man, negotiations are so tough because there's so many human temptations. Like, oh, I'm going to go hard, bluff. But if you just think about them as like as a piano player, I don't know what it's like to be a singer.
Right.
I hear being a singer is really different when you enter a trio setting because they just think about the chart differently.
Right.
Like the words matter, right? When I play, I don't even know what the words are. It's just the chords.
Like, why are you playing loud there? He's literally saying things.
Yeah. He said like quietly, and I was like, oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. But kind of just instead of saying, oh, I'm going to think about this because we're always in like some kind of negotiation. And I have found that I guess just like when you listen to the singer and follow the singer to accompany, definitely could work if you're treating your negotiation partner in the same way. But I think it's tempting to, lay down your demands and then see where you can go from there.
Yeah. It's human nature to put your demands out there. It requires bravery, like you said, to approach a negotiation with that mindset.
Yeah.
Because you do leave yourself vulnerable, just like in a jazz trio. There's a lot of vulnerability in three people being on a stage by themselves with acoustic instruments making the only sounds in the room. That's I don't think that's something that's hard to explain to people, but that is a very vulnerable thing, and
it is
being good at something doesn't necessarily make you brave. So I think when people hear an amazing piano player or see an amazing company, they think, oh, that must have been easy for them. But there's a lot of, there are a lot of people who are, exhibiting a lot of bravery to do what they do and making it look easy.
You're right. You're right. That's actually, I think that's super important. One thing I was going to add was, because we've been talking a lot about listening and kind of responding. When we chatted before, I was talking about form, like the jazz chart form. And I think it's important to state that you can't, I don't think you can effectively listen if you're in a trio or on a set if the form of the song is not second nature.
Mhm.
You know
Yep.
what right? You know
Yep.
exactly what I'm
I
talking about,
know
right? You're like,
exactly
oh, okay,
what
we're going
you
to the B section. Wait, how many
Yeah.
measures is that? All
Yeah.
right, so you're obsessed with figuring out how to stay on form than
Yeah.
listening. And so
Yep.
I think this thing about innovation, one, it's super important to you got to stick to the form. So like innovating as a coffee company doesn't mean we go and get into dog food,
Mhm.
but we have to know our form really, really well,
Right.
where it's just what we live and breathe. Because if you don't get the form, you don't get the foundation, you can't dance on water. You got to dance on
Mhm.
your dance floor.
That's right.
I think for maybe people are listening, I think it's just it as a jazz musician, it's a very high form to get to the point where all you're focused on is listening and responding. That's
Right.
really hard. And then it's even higher when you're listening, and then you can play like in 5/4 while the drummer's in 4/4. Because then
Right.
you're on both on different planes while you listen to each other. But where it starts is you're just learning the chart, man.
Mhm.
You're just learning how many bars, where's the A, where's the 2-5-1,
Right.
and you don't really need to do that with people. That's just you working and putting in your work. You
Right.
know, maybe it's like it's you getting your corporate experience. You just got to know how this stuff works.
Right.
And if you
Yeah.
don't, I mean, you might still innovate, but it's going to hamper you from innovating in collaboration with others.
Exactly.
So most of my experience, and I'm talking about this as if like I've gigged so much. It's not that. It's just I've practiced so much.
Yeah.
And 90,
That's
yeah,
what
yeah, that's what
that's
you're talking
what
about. The woodshed, right? It's
Yep,
not even
exactly.
like I don't like 99% of my musical experience is just practicing, man.
That is so true. And I bet there's an equivalent for, business people that people look up to. I think that
Yeah,
99%, it's the iceberg kind of thing.
yeah,
99% of what's going on, you're not going to see. And you being in the woodshed, working out those 2/5s, going through the box, working those changes, pentatonics, doing all the all the things that
yeah,
are boring and repetitive and rote. That's what gets you to
yeah.
dazzle in that 1%.
Yeah, because I've never been able to really mold a standard well until I've memorized it.
Hmm.
You know, and if you just think about memorizing a standard, that's fine. If you're doing like the simple ones like summertime or autumn leaves, but when we were talking about Donna Lee,
Yeah.
like I've been practicing that for a year. You know, just getting the lines by reading the notes.
Yeah.
I'm not even working on memorizing it yet.
Right.
So I think you gotta get your chops. You know, you gotta be in the wood. You gotta live in the woodshed, man.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
even talking to you now, it probably sounds cool if someone's listening, like, oh, this is interesting, or if it's not, that's a whole different thing. But if it's interesting, that's great. But we're just talking about something we know, right?
Right.
So this is not innovation, you and me talking. This is
Right.
just sharing the now. And this is like, how often am I doing a podcast interview? Like 1% of my time, probably less than 1% of my time.
Right.
So it's easy to show it. It's easy for people to see it. But I think the innovator's life is like kind of Albert Einstein. You're just in the books.
Right.
And you're not even concerned about if it's innovative. You're just in it because you're just passionate and you're trying things. And maybe going back to your first question, innovation is in the eye of the beholder is another one that could
Mm.
be interesting.
Hmm. Oh yeah. No, that's great. I mean, that does kind of put a nice bow on everything we talked about in terms of the difference between what people actually see and what you
Hmm.
experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jeff, any advice for future innovators, current or future innovators, people that want to break out of the now and do big things?
Yeah. I think it's so simple to me. It's figure out first, don't worry about the innovation, figure out what is true and intentional, in the words of Bill Evans, for you.
Hmm.
Because even if you come across innovation, but if you can't sit with it and feel that it is true and intentional, by virtue of what he also said, you won't be able to build on it.
Right.
And true value is not a now thing, it's growth, it's built over the time. So if it's not true and intentional, then it's not going to be as have as much potential as maybe you might want it to be. I think that the second thing is finding your true and your intentional is actually a completely different process from trying to pursue innovation. You know,
Mm.
that goes into like personal stuff and everything. But
Mm.
I think if you start there's really no way I think you can go wrong, because true and intentional by definition is true
Hmm.
and it's not arguable.
Right.
And I also feel like that's why Miles Davis was fantastic, because he wasn't playing to impress. He was playing from his heart, and you can kind of just hear it in the tracks.
Oh yeah.
And like, if you don't like it, you don't like it.
Right. Just leave it
But
here.
it's true. Yeah, but it's still there. And
Yep.
I don't know, I think there's something so powerful about that. So
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's those are wise words, my friend. Thank you so much for making the time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it. It's been a fantastic conversation.
no, my pleasure, Jared. And I think you're the wise one between the two of us. So it's definitely my pleasure. I appreciate you having me here.
All right, man. Well, take care. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this week's show. You can drop us a line on Twitter at Outlast LLC, OUTLAST LLC, or follow us on LinkedIn where we're Outlast Consulting. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.